Traditions are sacred in the South. The Masters, SEC football, and fried chicken anytime. Now, add one more. Pull up a chair, fix your glass, and get ready for some good old-fashioned Southern charm. Welcome to Success in Sweet Tea, a podcast dedicated to your success in business, lifestyle, and relationships, all with a shot of Southern magic. And now, coming to you from deep in the heart of the Southland, get ready for an engaging conversation with your new favorite Southern couple, Doug and Vickie Miles.
Hello everyone, my name is Doug Miles, and with me here today is Vickie Miles, my wife, and we'd like to welcome you to another installment of Success in Sweet Tea. We appreciate you tuning in.
And our guest today is a man with many fascinating and until now maybe unknown interests with talents, along with a successful career as an attorney and a distinguished judge. He's an avid sportsman, scuba diver, boat captain, author, lover of history, just to name a few. And we're so happy to have him today, the Honorable Frank McGuire III, or as his friends and family know him, Trippy.
Yeah, Trippy is a native of the state of Alabama and a longtime resident of Covington County and of Alabama, more specifically, home of the Rattlesnake Rodeo. And one good thing about Trippy is that Trippy is easily identified. He has his mind and his sights on three things, and that's his love of his faith, his family, and his eye on community service and service to the youth of the area.
And so we're excited to hear Trippy's stories today, and let's just go ahead and get started.
Yeah, let's all grab our glass here, Trip, and we'll toast success and sweet tea. Here you go. Cheers. I'm going to have a little bit here.
Just enough to get started.
I know what that was.
So, Doug, I think you were going to talk to Trippy a little bit about how in the world did he wind up in Alabama?
Yeah, that was one thing that we wanted to know is how does a guy with all of your credentials make it to OP?
Well, it had to do with a woman, but it started out with a best friend. Jimmy Jeffcoat came to Auburn as a freshman when I was a freshman there. He was from OP, and I was trying out for kicker for the football team, and Jimmy had been an all-state quarterback at OP High School and played quarterback in the high school all-star game. A mutual friend introduced us, said we had a lot in common. We did. We became fast friends. I started going to OP. I'd never even heard of OP. Started going to OP to visit Jimmy when he'd go home on weekends, and eventually met my wife at a fraternity brother's wedding at the reception. And she looked dangerous. I thought, I'd work on asking her out. I did. We clicked and ended up getting engaged. I was working in the trust department for the bank in Birmingham, at that time the First National Bank. And my wife's to-be father started recruiting me to come to OP and open up a law practice. And so he basically recruited me to OP from Birmingham. And I had never lived in OP until I returned from the honeymoon. I moved my stuff down to where we were going to live the week before the wedding and became an OP resident when we came back off the honeymoon.
So you were an Auburn grad and you went to where? To law school?
Went to Cumberland Law School. That's part of Sanford University. Went to OP, opened up a law practice, and it went from there. The rest is history. I never look back. OP's my cup of tea, speaking of tea.
Yes, absolutely. And since you've been in OP, you've actually become, you have a reputation as being known as the OP historian. So your love of history certainly came out while you were in OP. How did all that get started?
I was born with a love of history from, I think, the moment of birth. I started asking questions. No, not at birth, but I mean, since I was a child, I just always loved history, ate it up. And it just grew from there. I practiced law, of course. That was my prime focus because that was my occupation and profession. But anytime I could, I would try and do historic research. That was kind of a hobby. That and kids. I love kids. But history, when it came to reading books for pleasure, it was going to be books about the Creek Indians or the Creek War, early Alabama history. It's, American history I'm very interested in, but when it comes time for me to read something I want to enjoy, it's going to be about Alabama history.
Yeah, that's a lot of history, actually. Alabama's been a state since 1819, a long time.
And, we all studied Alabama history in fourth grade. That was the curriculum.
Yes.
And that's when my love for history really took a jump start.
I bet your fourth grade teacher would like to know that, Tripp. Did you ever tell
She
him?
knew it, I'm sure, because I just ate it up. I mean, especially when we started studying William Weatherford, known as Red Eagle.
Yes.
That really whetted my appetite, because my first hero was Tarzan. And
I've heard you do a Tarzan.
Wanted to grow up to be like Tarzan, still do. But when we started studying William Weatherford, Red Eagle, he was a real life Tarzan with the bravery and the strength, the love of nature, and he's just always been one of my heroes.
So you're an outdoor person too. An outdoorsman is what we would call you now, and you're an adventurer. You do all kinds of things that are done, outside amongst all the elements, and in the water, out of the water, in the caves, out of the caves, in the woods, out of the woods. Anyway, you've had a lot of experience in that. I know you love it.
Well, there's nothing like being out in God's creation. And I just love Mother Nature, love being out in the woods. When sometimes when I had to clear my head, I'd just go for a walk out in the woods and listen to the birds, observe the wildlife, just hear the sounds of the forest. Maybe it's the wind or a hawk, crows, birds, whatever. If I see a snake, so much the better. Or an alligator, even better.
I was going to say, now you've been known to go alligator hunting a time or two.
Right. And let me specify for our viewers, it's not really killing alligators. Talking about, it was spotlighting alligators or seeing alligators. I mean, it's just a big thrill. When I was a kid, I was fascinated. I was afraid of things that would kill you. My mom instilled in me a fear of snakes. And then we lived in Mobile when I was in my early years, and there were sharks. And sharks could eat you up, and alligators could too. So as a child, those were really scary to me. But fear turned to fascination and then respect. And now I just love seeing alligators. What few times I get to see them. Love seeing sharks. Been diving where there's sharks, they'll come up. If you're going to scuba dive, you're going to see sharks. So that's just part of it. But it's just a fascinating thing. And when I see snakes, alligators, or sharks, to me that's very relaxing, because it means you're really with nature.
It really doesn't matter to you whether you have somebody to go with you to scuba dive, even though it's safer for you. You just enjoy it regardless of whether anybody's there with you or not.
There, so often in my life, sometimes there were kids in the neighborhood, sometimes there were not. When there were not, I'd just go out in the woods and entertain myself. Climb up in a tree, stay up there, listening, observing things, and just learn to entertain myself. I don't always have somebody on the boat with me. I'll just entertain myself on the boat. Same thing goes for diving. You got to be really careful, but when diving first started out, when I was studying as a second grader in Weekly Reader in the summer series, this diver, I can't remember his name, but he'd go by himself because there just weren't any divers. Now, I hope my dive instructor's not listening to this.
Is that Jacques Cousteau?
Yeah, right. I'm about that old for him to have been my instructor, but I got certified to dive in 1985, and you don't do it by yourself. But if you're doing it in a safe environment, in an area you are very familiar with, where it's like your backyard, I think it's okay for me. Now, not everybody can do that, but I spent the first 9 months of my life underwater.
Yeah,
That's
did.
true,
And
Tripp.
it was in the dark, couldn't see. So, but I'm just really at home underwater. Started out snorkeling as a child, as a first grader. Had a little frog mask, they called them, and a little snorkel that had a thing up here with a rubber ball that would seal it up when you went underwater. That was my first snorkel. Those were real popular in 1960. But it went from there to more advanced snorkeling, and then finally to scuba diving. And it's just, there's no way to describe scuba diving. It's another world. It's a beautiful world. Everything is just as it's always been. The reefs, talking about the coral reefs, the fish, it's like you're going back in time, except it's the present day. But it's almost like your body's in suspended animation.
Yes, like slow
Everything's
motion.
real slow. Unless there's a shark, then things scatter and then they come right back real slow. And you're really in another world, and there's just no way to describe it. You're weightless. It's kind of like being in space, except it's a beautiful underwater world, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. The fish are friendly, and you're down there with Mother Nature, with marine life. It's just a fascinating place, a whole new world.
And you mentioned your childhood. I believe Dauphin Island was a place you frequented when you were younger.
It was. My grandparents, when they opened up Dauphin Island with the bridge, I think that was 1954. I got my first sunburn there at Dauphin Island. It was horrible.
It's terrible.
Mama soaked me in vinegar that night in the bathtub. But anyway, they subdivided the land. My grandfather and grandmother bought a lot, built a house there in 1963, and that's where we'd spend a lot of the time in the summer. It was about a mile from the beach. We would drive to the end of the street and cross over a quarter mile of sand dunes to get to the beach. But the other thing about it was there was a swamp 100 yards behind their house where there were water moccasins and alligators. So I had the best of both worlds. I had the beach, and then I had a swamp that I could go on with my cousins and explore.
So I guess those moccasins, Doug, is what got him started with rattlesnakes.
It really is.
And
it
then
started with water moccasins.
Rattlesnakes, you really did like things that were scary. You were not kidding us.
It didn't, yeah, and it was scary to begin with. I remember in fourth grade, a water moccasin ran right in front of me. It was so big that I thought it was a python. That was my first thought, a python. It ran right in front of me. I was cutting off as a escape route to the water. I was walking along a creek. My knees were knocking 45 minutes later. But, like I said, fear turned to fascination and then respect. And I had a cousin that loved snakes as much as me, and we would spend hours in the swamp just watching the snakes.
And it doesn't bother you to go grab one, does it?
Well, you got to be careful.
With the right tools and
Right,
in the
you gotta
right
have the right
situation.
tools, yeah. Snakes. But when I'm out in the wild in nature, I let them be. I just like to watch them and let them be. But of course, for the rattlesnake rodeo, I'm a snake handler and pick them up. But you don't just freehand. You pin their head down gently and then pick them up.
So who taught you how to do that?
Well, a friend of mine, Jay Michael, the OpJC, started the rattlesnake rodeo back in, I think, the 1950s. Actually, J.P. Jones started it, but I believe he was a JC at that time. And of course, it's a big event now, but Jay Michael, a good friend of mine, was JC's president, and he actually taught me how to pick them up. And there's not much to teach. You just, he would pin the head down with the snake stick, and he told me, pick it up, told me how to do it, get your best grip, and if something goes wrong, all you do is just, you drop the snake. But now nothing's going to go wrong if you're holding it right.
I don't like the way they have a distinct odor. They really do. I mean, you get it we've been to that.
Yes, we have.
Rodeo, and you walk down on the football field where they have it, and it's just, there's an odor down there, and it's from the snakes.
Well, yeah, they put out a musk.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to get it sprayed on you because then you're going to smell for a while. But fortunately, I've not been sprayed but once. And but anyway, yeah, it's really, that's my one time a year to really commune with snakes. As weird as that sounds, I just love reptiles, love nature.
It's a lot of fun to go out on really, really cold nights and take the flashlight and look for alligators, and you see those eyes, and those eyes, you don't expect them to be orange, which is the color you see. And then you look up, that danger is there. Then you look up, and the sky is just beautiful. The sky is just, and one star everywhere, and
Right.
it's beautiful. Usually it's really cold,
Mm-hmm.
and those are some really good times.
Yeah, and we've done that before, of course.
Absolutely.
But yeah, when you're out in the country, near a swamp, no lights, like you said, you can see everything in the celestial bodies, and beautiful, gorgeous. Even in the summer, you know, it's Margaret and I have been down to that particular spot and had sleeping bags, put them on the back of the pickup, and watched satellites go by, falling stars, things like that. And I used to do that a lot. That's something else I started out doing as a child, was observing the stars. In sixth grade, we studied astronomy. My sixth grade teacher really drilled it into us. Two of my best friends had a telescope. We'd go out every night with that telescope. Now I have my own telescope to look at them with. But
Well, you've also shown a lot of young people nature. You are also known for taking groups of young kids to caves and all kinds of dangerous places. Actually, I don't think I'd like to go on that tour, but I understand you have a lot of people who do enjoy that.
well, I never outgrew young people. That's one thing I never outgrew. In high school, student council, loved student council. My minister, well, I was church youth group leader as a senior in high school and loved that. When I was in law school, my minister made me take over the teenage prayer and share group that they had on Wednesday nights. And I don't have time for that, but he made me. And I found out I could work with young people really well and loved them, always have. And that's continued throughout my life. I mean, I guess one of my big passions is being around young people.
Mm-hmm.
I just love the young folks. They're special.
But you've been a mentor for the young people of Op for many, many years. And you grew your family there. You raised your kids there. Your daughters. You met Margaret. Tell us a little bit about your family. It's been a...
All right. Well, let me go back. My friend Jimmy Jeffcoat that I referred to, he's Dr. Jimmy Jeffcoat now, although he's retired. But he was the youth minister at First Methodist Church several summers. And when I would come down on weekends to visit, he would be doing things with the youth, and I was there with him, and just fell in love with the Op kids before I even moved on. Mm-hmm. They were just great all-American kids. The ones that came to Auburn, all the guys pledged my fraternity, Fiji, Phi Gamma Delta. And there was something special about the Op kids that came to Auburn. And I noticed that in law school when I'd go visit Jimmy. And when I finally decided to move to Op, right before we got married, I made a decision then that I was going to work with the young people. I just wanted to do that. And but anyway, Margaret and I dated, got married, moved to Op, and I started practicing. She started teaching. And we didn't have kids for 4 years, but I became the advisor to the Op High School Interact Club, which was sponsored by the Op Rotary Club that I was a member of, and did that for 28 years. And took them on a lot of trips to Panama City, to the Senior Bowl in Mobile. I'd take them canoeing at the Springs, and it grew from there. Now I've got several places. I got kids at my church that are like family, and I love taking them on what I call adventures or excursions out in the nature and to show them history too.
And speaking of kids and history, you also do an event every year where you go to the schools and you do some, I think you do some Indian history there as well?
Yeah, the fourth graders study Alabama history still, and I've got a PowerPoint on what they study, particularly the Creek Indians. Mm-hmm. Like I said, William Weatherford was I was fascinated by William Weatherford. And so my love of the Creek Indians grew from there. But I do a PowerPoint on the Creeks, the Indians in Alabama, the mound builders, the ones that built the mounds that predated the tribes that we know today, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Creek. And I take, each year I'll take a group to Fort Mims where the big battle occurred. I take my local kids to some mounds on private property that the owners don't mind me taking them to. But yeah, they have Pioneer Day. Ms. Gafford, a good friend of mine, Heather Gafford, started that, 8 or 10 years ago and asked me to be an Indian. So I I'm William Weatherford. I speak to the kids and tell stories about my life as William Weatherford, which are fascinating stories, and keep their attention. And then I'll go to the fourth grade classes at least 4 times to give them a PowerPoint, because the PowerPoint's a little over 2 hours long, so we divide it up into segments. And I've never had them get bored, because Alabama history is fascinating. The history of the Indians in Alabama. It's hard for us to realize today that our state was not sparsely populated. There were tribes here, and we were densely populated with Indians, lost civilizations. In fact, our tribes that we know of today, the 4 tribes, you know, the mound builders predated them. And there were mounds all over Alabama. And our tribes in the 1800s and the late 1700s could not tell you where those mounds came from. There was no written history to pass down to the next generation. So our modern tribes knew nothing about the history of the mounds. It was some unknown people, but the mounds were all over, and some of them are magnificent. You know, we've got some at Moundville, south of Tuscaloosa. We've also got some in the Tensas River Delta in the swamp at Mound Island, the Bottle Creek mounds. Took, I don't know how long to build those things, but they're fascinating to look at, and to think that those people could do that. And, you know, we think, well, they were simple people. Well, they really weren't. They were extremely smart. I mean, you think of all they did, how they made arrowheads, made their own pottery, their own clothing. They were extremely self-sufficient, wonderful hunters, very close to nature, a lot of admirable characteristics that they had.
You make me wish I would have paid more attention in the 4th grade. I missed a lot.
Come to one of my presentations and I'll
have
catch
to
you up
do
on
that.
There's something that we both missed. I know I missed it.
What did
I
we
don't know
miss?
if you missed it or not. But I'd never heard of a town named Poley.
Right.
Poley, Poley, Alabama. And tell me about Poley. I want to know.
Okay, so we're fast forwarding now.
Yeah.
Past the Indians. Well, the earliest, Poley is a ghost town outside of Opp.
So now we've gone from Indians to ghosts.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And anyway, when I was at Auburn, one of my fraternity brothers from Opp, Jim Dowling, was going into architecture. And I went home with him one weekend. He took me to this beautiful mansion that was abandoned, the Shepherd Mansion. And it gave me an architectural tour of this beautiful home. He said this was the social center of this area. Well, it was out in the woods. I mean, there was nothing there except this home, and it was out in the middle of nowhere. And he said this was the social. I thought, oh, come on now, really? But he was right. It really was, and there was a town built around it called Poley. And the more I write for the newspaper 3 years ago asked me to write a weekly historic column because they knew I loved op history. So I did, and I eventually started writing about Poley and got into it more and more until I got a real fascination for the place and became a fanatic about Poley. And so then I started going down there in the woods and finding some of the ruins left of the old town that is way back in the woods. The Shepherd Mansion is now gone, where my friend took me. But Mr. Shepherd is he was one of the part owners of the town of Poley. It was a lumber sawmill town. And actually it had been around since 1854 that we know of. Now, that was because John Wesley Woodham and his wife Amanda moved there from Echo, Alabama, near Ozark. Probably a 2 days journey at least. They came there he was going to go to work in the sawmill. So 1854, 2 days away, come all the way to this new town to work at a sawmill. It must have been really well established already. Opp didn't come about until 1901. So Poley predated Opp by half a century. And, after a while they thinned out the forests. Poley flooded twice and eventually became a ghost town. Folks moved to Opp. Opp kind of came about that same time. But a lot of history about Poley. Mrs. Shepherd, who lived in the mansion, I started doing research on her. she wrote books of poetry that are actually published, and she would go around the southeastern United States reading her poetry at large gatherings. She was very famous. I didn't know that.
And you wrote or you've begun a book
Right.
regarding about her.
Right, the Shepherds of Polio, because they were a fascinating family.
Right.
Extremely smart people, and moved into what was nothing but long-leaf farce from Montgomery, and being involved in Montgomery society and culture, and to move to Polio out in the middle of the woods was quite an undertaking for them, but they did really well. And anyway, fascinating family, and I've written a lot about them for the newspaper, and yeah, I'll eventually publish it.
And speaking of your writing, that's a great opportunity to talk about your latest historical novel that you've written, a fiction novel, I believe.
Yes, there was a murder that occurred in 1932.
Okay, so it's based on some historical event.
It's real life.
Thank you for being with us for this episode of Success and Sweet Tea. Join Doug and Vickie in 2 weeks for part 2 of their chat with Trippy McGuire and learn more about his newly released best-selling book about a 1920s flapper from a century ago and so much more.